Welcome to our November 2005 compliance briefing from Cressive Privacy Compliance. In this briefing, we'll cover the audit work, the monitoring work that our tool does on a month-to-month basis, and we'll share the key findings for the month in terms of website privacy compliance. With me on the call is Ram Kumar, who is our main privacy consultant. His job is basically helping clients make their websites compliant to GDPR and other regulatory frameworks. Hi, Ram.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mustafa, for the introduction. Our analysis included pharmaceutical sites, telecommunications, FMCGs, and professional services in the EU, UK, US, and Canada. So our analysis simulates users from these locations, and as well as it caters for different privacy regulation frameworks like GDPR, CCPA, and TIDA in Canada. And it also caters for the different banner providers like OneTrust, User-Centrics, and Cookies.
That's a good distribution of the sites that we've been monitoring, Ram, in November. So that's over 600 websites. These are not companies that don't care about this sort of stuff. They are not your next door neighbor's blog. They are actual serious big brand websites.
Yes, these are big brands, and a few of these brands are heavily regulated in terms of what type of content they put on and what type of user information they take and process. So it's key that privacy is a critical element of their digital service offering.
Right. And what we found is that 77% of these sites are not compliant to the applicable regulatory framework. That's a massive number. Which industries do you see this as a bigger problem?
Yeah, I think overall more B2C and consumer focused websites are more prone to be non-compliant because they want to tend to capture more data. B2B less so.
Okay, so is it because just by the nature of the business, consumer sites need to do more marketing campaigns, they're more active, they probably have more changes happening on site? Does that play into it?
Yes, more consumer data, more how users interact with the digital assets will help the marketing teams to make and curate their marketing plans. But the key point is to do it in a legal and privacy compliant way.
Right. Before I got into this stuff, to be honest with you, I just thought in order to be GDPR compliant, you just need to have a privacy banner. But the numbers we produce here are very interesting because out of the 624 sites, 82% have consent banners. Yet 76% of sites that have banners are still non-compliant. So how do you explain that gap?
Yes, so there's a general consensus that having a banner means you're compliant, but we have found out based on our compliance reports and analysis, that's not the case. We do still see network requests and cookies and e-tags and beacons fire before the user has given consent, so in the pre-consent phase, and even when the user has explicitly declined for tracking through the banner, and still these elements fire.
Yeah, and obviously that changes in terms of the regulatory framework that is applicable, right?
Yeah, so it differs from region to region. So in the US, primarily it's opt-out. So that would mean that you can track users before even they make the consent. And then once they meet the consent issue, whether to accept or reject, you need to respect that. But in GDPR, it's stricter where you can't track until a user consent is given.
Yeah, understood. Now, month on month, this really hasn't changed much, although we have gone down from 80% to 77%, which is the bottom of the slide. And I think nearly all of the sites that are compliant, the vast majority of those are probably your client websites that you've helped become compliant, right?
Yes, so I work with a number of clients and specifically with the marketing and privacy teams to audit and identify the problems, the troublemakers as such, and then to chalk out a proper plan on how we mitigate all these risks. Sometimes it could be removal of cookies from the hard-coded elements on the site. Sometimes it could be elements which are in Google Tag Manager or Adobe Launch without any blocking mechanisms which reads into user consent. So to make all these minor fixes and then we scan and we audit and monitor over time.
Understood. And now we can just come to the reasons for that number is so big, 77%. And these are probably the common themes that we've captured here. First one is non-compliant banners. Now that seems like a really obvious one, doesn't it?
Yes, I've seen companies and businesses, digital assets having banners which are non-compliant for that particular region. For example, if you operate primarily out of a GDPR required country, you would need to have explicit accept and reject buttons so that you are giving the user a free choice. But I've seen instances where people just put on a banner which is accept all or manage my choices. So that makes it harder for the user. It's additional clicks for them to reject. And people tend to get on accessing the content rather than dealing with the consent banner. But people do expect that their consent conditions are to be respected. So that's the
Yeah.
general expectation.
Exactly. So when I see that sort of thing, I honestly, if I want to read that article or view that page, I just click on accept. I'm a simple person, perhaps. If you go to manage choices, which is often the other choice, it's such a long list of things that you have to classify and then read into. And I say, leave it. Just let me just accept it. It's fine. And it's probably not the best idea, I'm sure. Okay. And then miscategorized cookies. So that's things which are actually marketing classified as functional. Is it a mistake? Is it something done on purpose?
So it's a combination of both, I feel, because the configuration of the CMP banner, the cookie consent banner, also requires you to classify the different cookies you drop on the website. So by classifying analytics cookies as functional or necessary, that doesn't discount you from the fact that you are non-compliant, that you're just pushing it to a different bucket. And let's say analytics will fire before the user consent is given, which is still non-compliant. So you need to make sure that it's classified in the right bucket as such. And the cookies needs to be functional, and necessary cookies are cookies which are essential to providing that digital service, be it a website or a application.
Got it. So classifying something which is actually as per the regulatory framework is not essential, even if you classify it as that functional because I don't know, you want to feel good about it, or you really feel that it is actually important for your business, that actually doesn't mitigate the risk, right? It doesn't take the onus away from you and it keeps the risk exactly the same.
Yep. Usually this is done by the data privacy officer responsible for the business, and they are really good in terms of classifying which cookies goes into which bucket and making sure the configuration is right before public is able to access such assets.
But we still see cases where they are miscategorized, therefore it's either a human error or perhaps something else there.
It requires constant monitoring because every month you do an audit, for privacy reasons. I think this should be also part of it, making sure all the cookies and elements you are adding onto the site is correctly classified. And more so for consumer focused sites where campaigns are more ad hoc. This month you run a campaign and you send it off. It's good to have a quarterly or a half yearly checkpoint to make sure all the elements on the site are house kept and all the cookies are also up to date.
Yeah, exactly. The next two common issues are probably similar in nature there. Tracking by specific vendors that you see more often than others, and they fire before consent is obtained.
So in terms of vendors, like I see Amazon, LinkedIn, and Bing, Clarity, these kind of tags fire before consent. And I think businesses need to realize that these tags needs consent before firing, especially if you're operating in the GDPR required countries. And given that some websites you are able to access the content before giving consent, and that doesn't give a signal for the business to track you without your consent. So assumed consent is very risky because where do you draw the line when a user lands on a website and then ignores the banner and then start interacting with the content, but you still want to measure what they do, but it's still non-compliant if you still track them without their consent.
In GDPR, you can't do that, right?
Yeah. So they need to give a explicit consent through the banner.
Understood. Yeah. And I think one more point probably worth mentioning here is that when we say any kind of tracking, obviously a lot of the focus is on cookies, but this tracking includes a vast variety of tracking technologies, right?
Yes, the framework is more focused on cookies, but we have seen in instances where tracking happens on different levels in terms of like network requests, shift counters. We have seen e-tags, beacons sending data before the user has given consent. So this could include like encrypted session IDs, IP addresses, your device, your OS, and your preferences as such. But there's a fine line between taking information for providing a better service than taking information to tailor your experience and your marketing ads.
Got it. I think that should cover this month's findings. Just to recap, vast majority of websites that we test for, which belong to regulated industries like pharmaceutical and telecommunications and financial services, the vast majority of these sites are non-compliant to the applicable regulatory frameworks in EU, the UK, US, and Canada. The vast majority of these sites have banners from some of the biggest consent management providers in the world, like OnePlus, Trustdark, and UserCentrics. And yet the misimplementation or misconfiguration of these consent systems leads to 76% of sites that have implemented a consent management solution to be non-compliant. We will join you for December 2025 findings. And until then, it is goodbye from me and Ram.